Welcome back. All right, so continuing my favorite players playlist, we are now going to take a look at the Florida Panthers. And if it feels like this is in a random order, you're right. Outside of me covering like Quebec after Colorado and Hartford after Carolina, it really is. It really is random. So number 20 on this list of my favorite Florida Panthers in their time, and of course I'm wearing a blue jersey with the jumping panther, which I like quite a bit. Number 20 on the list, a player who played for the original Panthers, Bill Lindsay. Bill Lindsay, a bottom six forward, one of those very hard-working blue-collar players that the Florida Panthers employed during their 96 Stanley Cup final run. So Bill Lindsay, a player that I liked, and bottom six forward, worked hard. You know, the standard THG favorite player type. Number 19, now, what's interesting is, what I remember about Jay Bouwmeester was the final year he was in Florida before he became a free agent. And Florida was trying to reach the playoffs, trying to show that there was some reason for Bouwmeester to stick around. And what ended up happening instead was they did not make the playoffs. They fell short. Bouwmeester ends up going to free agency and signs with Calgary. And there was a lot of discussion at the time about Florida and how they'd failed, and this just set everything back a bit. So while the conversation isn't that around Florida now, it's not that long ago when it was. Number 18 on the list. Another defenseman. Keith Yandle. Keith Yandle, long games played streak, absolutely. Good offensively minded defenseman and solid all around player. So Keith Yandle at number 18 on my list. You guys can let me know where he'd be on your list, of course, as some do in the comments. But yeah, Keith Yandle comes in at number 18 for me. Number 17. Sergei Bobrovsky. Sergei Bobrovsky has lived up to his contract. At the time that he signed that contract, has a $10 million cap hit attached to it. There were questions. There were a lot of questions. And those questions really were there until they won that Stanley Cup in 2024. And then it became, okay, so that contract worked out pretty well, just like everybody thought it would. And then, of course, the Stanley Cup in 2025 as well. And Bobrovsky is on the list. Number 16. I feel like the next time out, if I do this again in 5 years, Gustav Forsling probably higher on the list. I have Gustav Forsling 16th on the list. Went through the Vancouver and Chicago organizations before Florida grabbed him on waivers, and it's one of the greatest waiver wire pickups in the history of the National Hockey League. As far as I'm concerned, Forsling has found himself a real home in Florida, and Florida's paid him well for having found himself a home there. So it's worked out really well for both sides. Number 15 on the list. Another current member of the team. Carter Verhaeghe. A player who the Tampa Bay Lightning, I believe it was that they couldn't afford to hold on to him for cap reasons. Verhaeghe ends up going to the Florida Panthers, and he has flourished. And he has a long-term contract with Florida, as almost everybody does now, of course. Verhaeghe, number 15 on my list. And it's been a really good story of a player who I know that he was pretty well thought of as a prospect, but I think he's overachieved above what was expected of him. Number 14 on the list. He mostly played bottom 6 minutes. Rob Niedermayer. What's interesting with Rob Niedermayer is that he was considered on some level to be a flop compared to, well, like in relation to where he was drafted. He was drafted very early. However, he played a long time in the National Hockey League, and he was a key player for the Florida Panthers at certain points too. So I don't know that I'd necessarily say Niedermayer was a flop. He just ended up being a defensive forward rather than an offensively minded forward, which is okay, but it does cause people to question whether or not that was a pick that should have been someone else instead. But still, Niedermayer, good long career for him. Number 13. There he is. Stu Barnes. So I've had Stu Barnes on a list previous. I believe that was the Dallas one. Now he's on the Florida list. I believe he was part of the 1996 team that went to the Stanley Cup final. Stu Barnes, hard worker, could play top six, could play third line as well. And as I remember, he played center, but he could play on the wing as well. So Stu Barnes is one of those players that obviously THG's going to end up liking. He's not necessarily the biggest player. He does have versatility to his game. He adapts to different situations well. And yeah, number 13 on my list. Number 12. Aaron Ekblad. I've seen criticism of Ekblad's game over the years. I've honestly never had any kind of criticism of his game. Have there been gaffes here and there? Sure. But honestly, I think Ekblad's a really good defenseman. He's been in Florida his whole career. He signs an extension with them as well, as they're going to keep the whole gang together for next season. And Ekblad is very likely one of those players, too, that could move up the next time that I do a list of my favorite Florida Panthers. Number 11. And this was just a good story. Evgeny Dodonov comes over. His NHL career sputters here and there. And so he heads back over to Europe, plays there. And then when he comes back over to the NHL, he plays quite well. I remember there wasn't a whole lot of discussion of Dodonov coming back. And then he ends up being really good. So, yeah, Evgeny Dodonov, good run for him with the Florida Panthers team that wasn't quite what they are now. But you were starting to see some positive signs from Florida at points where Dodonov's there. So now we get into the top 10. And number 10 on the list, another goaltender. Thomas Vokoun. I've seen comments on the channel about how Vokoun was one of the more underrated goaltenders. Agreed. Vokoun was a very underrated goaltender because of where he played and when he played for the locations that he did. Most of his career was spent with teams that weren't necessarily top draws, top teams in the NHL, but he still went out and put out really good numbers. His numbers as a goaltender were really strong. So Thomas Vokoun, number 10 on my list. Number 9. Played in Florida for a long time. Olli Jokinen. Olli Jokinen, good top 6 forward. Scored points and goals for Florida teams that struggled to score points and goals. And was a pretty good all-around player. So Olli Jokinen, number 9 on my list. And you guys can let me know where he'd be on yours. Number 8. Scott Mellanby. Maybe the poster child for that blue-collar work ethic that the Florida Panthers had right out of the gate. Mellanby had a really strong career with the Florida Panthers. And Mellanby's one of those guys that I use as an argument in favor of expansion. I think expansion, being on a team where he had an opportunity to play top minutes, showed teams just how versatile Mellanby could be and how effective he could be. And that Florida team, while it wasn't fun to watch because they really did play a very trapping style, it was entertaining to see them knock off so many good teams, and Mellanby was a big part of that. So Mellanby's number 8 on my list. Number 7. Pavel Bure. Bure with Florida, he scored a lot of goals. And he scored a lot of goals for Florida teams that did not have a lot of offensive talent. So his ability to score goals was absolutely huge and cannot be overstated in relation to the Florida Panthers. And it was nice to see him back to playing at that level after some tough seasons in Vancouver before the trade. And so Bure ends up number 7 on my list of favorite Panthers. Number 6. Another former Canuck. I know I saw some comments about Jovanovski not being on my list of favorite Vancouver Canucks. I get that. He just wasn't one of my top 21 favorites. But number 6 for Florida, yep, Ed Jovanovski. A number 1 draft pick who left Florida and then went back, proving that you can go home again. And I think he was better during his second go-around with Florida than he was for his first. And Jovanovski was just, he was a really solid player in big games. So if you had a big game, Jovanovski was a defenseman who could play those for you. And so bringing that experience back to Florida, I think, was important. Number 5 on my list, current player, and I really do think the sky could be the limit for Anton Lundell. Lundell has shown at points where there's injuries and he moves up the lineup just how good he can be offensively. He should be a point per game player, but playing in Florida, playing behind so many good top talent players, he probably won't reach that number yet. But at some point in time, I do think Lundell ends up being a first-line center in the NHL and probably around a point per game player. Plus, he's very good at both ends of the ice. So Lundell, there's really not much not to like about Lundell's game. Number 4 on the list. So there's been quite the conduit between Florida and Vancouver over the years. And Roberto Luongo might be the ultimate example of that, although I mentioned with Jovanovski as well. But Luongo, they acquired him in a trade from Florida, and then they ended up trading him back to Florida some years later. And during his first go-around, Luongo was really the only thing keeping them anywhere near a playoff spot. Played some absolutely fantastic hockey. And then during his second go-around, he did it again. He was kind of fantastic for Florida both times around. Now, of course, he's an executive in the organization. He absolutely deserves both of those Stanley Cup rings. And it's nice to see him happy and successful. Even if it is in retirement, it's nice to see that after all those years in Vancouver, where I felt like some of the criticism was really a little bit over the top. Number 3 on the list for me, another current player, Sam Reinhart. Sam Reinhart can score goals. He can prevent goals at the other end. He can do a little bit of everything. Shorthanded goals, sure. Power play goals, absolutely. 5-on-5, still pretty good. So Sam Reinhart has shown tremendous growth since arriving in Florida from Buffalo, and he's another example of how young players, you may not want to trade them too early on because it can go back to bite you. Or at the very least, to get back for those young players what really and truly you should. And don't be afraid to ask for a lot for those players because it can really work out, as Reinhart has in Florida. Number 2 on my list, no longer a member of the team, but Jonathan Huberdeau gets number 2 on my list. Jonathan Huberdeau had some great seasons for the Florida Panthers, has struggled to find his rhythm in Calgary, although this past season for him in Calgary is better than the previous seasons. But Jonathan Huberdeau will be remembered as one of the best players that Florida had prior to that big trade that he was a part of to bring in Matthew Tkachuk. So Jonathan Huberdeau is number 2. So who's number 1 on my list? I don't think this name's going to surprise people if they've been following the channel long enough, but Alexander Barkov. Barkov, it's always interesting to me because every time that I do videos ranking forwards and anything like that, I know that I'll always be told that Barkov's underrated. I've been conditioned to that by when Datsuk was in the league, and Datsuk was always underrated too. There are certain players that fans will say, no matter where you put them, in fact, you could put them at number 1. And fans would say, well, you put him at number 1, but you need to explain just how much number 1 he is and how far number 1 he is. And how number 2 is actually number 4. You shouldn't have a 2 and a 3 because Barkov's kind of 1, 2, and 3. Well, on this list, he's number 1. And Barkov is one of the best two-way forwards in the game. And right there, people are like, well, how can you say one of? He's the best two-way forward in the game. You're underrating him. That makes my point. But either way, Barkov, fantastic player, couple of Stanley Cup rings. He's already done enough to make it into the Hall of Fame. I have no doubt in my mind he's getting there. And so it is nice to see this era for Florida where they've had some success after so many years of failure and so many years of mediocrity. And that's why there's so many current members of the team that are on the board as well. They've been honestly intimidating to watch over the last couple of playoffs, and we'll see what they do in 2026. But either way, these are my 2025 picks for my favorite Florida Panthers of all time. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.